Hi everyone, it's Creatively Calm, coming to you again from my living room. And today we're going to continue the reading of Dragon Rider by Cornelia Funk. Today we will read chapters 9 and 10. 9. Nettlebrand, the Golden One. The dwarves were right. The castle near the place where Firedrake had landed by mistake was a sinister spot, and far more dangerous for a silver dragon than for a few mountain dwarfs. Its occupant took no more interest in dwarves than he did in spiders or flies, but he had been waiting for a dragon for more than 150 years. Rain had long ago eroded the castle walls. The towers were in ruins, and the stairways overgrown with thistles and thorn bushes. But that didn't bother the castle's owner. His armor protected him from the rain, cold, and wind. Nettlebrand, the Golden One, lay in the deep, damp vaults far underground, longing for the return of the good years, when the castle roof was intact, and he enjoyed chasing the only prey he liked to hunt, silver dragons. Nettlebrand's own scales still shone like pure gold. His claws were sharper than splinters of glass. His teeth had a keen cutting edge, and he was mightier than any other living creature. But he was bored, consumed by boredom. It made him wild and savage, more ferocious than a chained dog, and so bad-tempered that he had long ago eaten most of his servants. Only one of them was left, a spindly little mannikin called Twigleg. Day in, day out, he polished Nettlebrand's armor, dusted the spines on his back, cleaned his gleaming teeth, and sharpened his claws. Day after day, from sunrise to sunset, Twigleg worked while the golden dragon lay in his ruined castle, hoping one of his countless spies would bring him the news that he had waited for so long, news of the last dragons, so that he could go hunting again. On the morning when Firedrake was sleeping among the rocks only a few mountain peaks away, 2 spies had already come back, one of Nettlebrand's ravens from the north and a will-o'-wisp from the south. But they had nothing to tell him, nothing at all. Only silly stories about a couple of trolls here, a few fairies there, a sea serpent, and a gigantic bird. Nothing about dragons, not a word. So Nettlebrand ate them for breakfast, even though he knew that raven feathers always gave him terrible indigestion. He was in a shocking temper when Twigleg, armed with the cleaning cloths and brushes, bowed low before him. As usual, the mannikin clambered up onto Nettlebrand's huge body to polish the golden scales of his master's armor from head to tail. "Careful, you bone-brained homunculus!" Nettlebrand spat at him. "Ouch! Don't tread on my stomach, for goodness sake! Why didn't you stop me from eating that wretched black bird?" "You wouldn't have listened to me, master," replied Twigleg. Picking up a green bottle, he poured some of the polish, specially made by the mountain dwarfs for his master's scaly armor, in a bucket of water. That polish was the secret of buffing the scales to such a shine that he could see his reflection in them. "Correct," growled Nettlebrand. Twigleg dropped his cloth into the bucket and set to work. But when he had cleaned only 3 of the scales, his master groaned and turned over. Twigleg's bucket fell off and landed on the ground. "That will do," bellowed Nettlebrand. "You can leave the polishing for today. It makes my stomach worse. Get on with sharpening my claws." And he blew Twigleg off his back with his icy breath. The little creature tumbled headfirst to the cracked flagstones of the castle floor. Without a word he picked himself up again, took a file from his belt, and got to work on the dragon's black claws. Nettlebrand, disgusted, watched him. "Come on, tell me something," he growled. "Tell me about my heroic deeds of old." "Oh no, not again," muttered Twigleg. "What did you say?" growled Nettlebrand. "Oh, nothing, nothing," replied Twigleg hastily. "Right, master, just a moment. How did it go? Oh, yes." The mannikin cleared his throat. "One cold, moonless winter night in the year 1423. 1424, snarled Nettlebrand. "How often do I have to tell you, beetle brain?" He struck out angrily at the little man, but Twigleg nimbly avoided him. "One cold, moonless winter night in the year 1424, he began again. "The famous alchemist, Petrosius Henbane, created the greatest marvel the world has ever seen. The mightiest being, the mightiest and most dangerous being," Nettlebrand interrupted. "Get it right, can't you? or I'll bite your spindly legs. Carry on." "The mightiest and most dangerous being," Twigleg obediently recited, "ever to set claw on this earth. He made it from a creature whose name no one knows, and he added fire and water, gold and iron, hard stone, and the dew that falls on leaves of lady's mantle. Then he took the power of lightning, and with it he breathed life into his creation, and he named his great work Nettlebrand." Twigleg yawned. "Sorry, excuse me." "Carry on," growled Nettlebrand, closing his red eyes. "Carry on, yes, sir. At your service, sir." Twigleg stuck the file under his arm and moved over to the next paw. "That same night," he continued, "Petrosius made 12 homunculi, the little mannikins, the last of who sits here filing your claws. The others—" "Skip that bit," growled Nettlebrand. "Would you like me to tell you how our creator, Petrosius, perished between the teeth of your noble jaws? No, that's not interesting. Tell me about my hunt. Armor cleaning, my great hunt." Twigleg sighed. "Soon after his creation, the magnificent, invincible, ever-shining Nettlebrand, the Golden One, set out to remove all other dragons from the face of the earth. He planned to polish them off in one fell swoop." "Polish them off?" Nettlebrand opened his eyes. "Polish them off? What do you mean? That doesn't sound very heroic." "Oh, do I usually put it some other way, master?" Twigleg rubbed his pointed nose. "It must have just slipped out. Oh dear, the file's broken." "Fetch a new one," growled Nettlebrand, "but hurry up, or you can join your 11 brothers in my belly." "No thanks," whispered Twigleg, jumping up, but just as he was about to run off, a large raven came hopping down the stone steps that led to the hidden vaults of the castle. Twigleg was not surprised to see the raven. Those black-feathered birds were Nettlebrand's most industrious and faithful spies, even though he was in the habit of eating some of them. But today a fat mountain dwarf was sitting on the raven's back, and it was unusual for the dwarfs to venture up here. They didn't even deliver the armor polish themselves. One of the ravens was always sent to collect it. The dwarf held his oversized hat on tight, and the raven hopped down the steps. His face was red with excitement. At the foot of the steps he hastily climbed off the bird's black back, took a couple of steps toward Nettlebrand, then prostrated himself flat on the floor in front of him. "What do you want?" asked Twigleg's master grumpily. "I've seen one," uttered the dwarf without raising his face from the floor. "I've seen one, your goldness." "Seen one what?" Bored, Nettlebrand scratched his chin. Twigleg went over to the dwarf and bent down to him. "You better get to the point instead of squashing your fat nose flat," he whispered. "My master has truly terrible temper." The dwarf scrambled up, looking nervously at Nettlebrand, and pointed a trembling finger at the wall behind him. "One of those," he breathed. "That's what I saw." Nettlebrand turned around. There was a tapestry on the wall, a tapestry woven by human beings hundreds of years ago. Its colors were faded, but even in the darkness you could make out what it showed. Knights hunting a silver dragon. Nettlebrand suddenly sat up. His red eyes stared down at the dwarf. "You say you're a silver dragon?" Nettlebrand suddenly sat up. His eyes stared... Nettlebrand suddenly sat up. His red eyes stared down at the dwarf. "You say you saw a silver dragon?" he asked. His voice boomed through the ancient vaults. "Where? On our mountain?" stammered the dwarf, straightening up. "He landed there this morning with a brownie and a human. I flew straight here on the raven to tell you. Will you give me one of your scales now? One of your golden scales?" "Quiet," growled Nettlebrand. "I must think." "But you promised," cried the dwarf. Twigleg pushed him aside. "Quiet, stupid," he hissed. "Haven't you got any sense under that big hat of yours? You can count yourself lucky if he doesn't eat you. Climb back on the raven and get out of here. It's probably just a big lizard you saw." "No, it isn't," cried the dwarf. "It's a dragon. His scales look as if they were made of moonlight, and he's big, very big." Nettlebrand looked at the tapestry. He stood there motionless, then he turned. "It'll be worse for you if you're wrong," he said in a deep voice. "I shall squash you like a cockroach if you've raised my hopes only to dash them again." The dwarf bowed his head. "Armor cleaner, come here," growled Nettlebrand. Twigleg jumped. The new file. The file, yes, master, he cried. I'll fetch it at once. I'll hurry. I'll fly like the wind. Forget the file, spat Nettlebland. I have more important work for you to do. Get on the raven's back and fly to the mountain where this idiot came from. Find out what he saw, and if it's really a dragon, then find out why he's alone, where he comes from, and what the human and the brownie are doing with him. I want to know everything, you hear? Everything. Twigleg nodded and ran over to the raven, who was still waiting patiently at the foot of the steps. Disconcerted, the dwarf watched him go. So what about me? He asked. How am I supposed to get back? Nettlebrand smiled. It was not a nice smile. You're going to sharpen my claws while Twigleg is away. You're going to polish my armor and dust my spines, clean my teeth, and pick the woodlice out of my scales. You're my new armor cleaner. That's my reward for your good news. The dwarf looked at him horrified. Nettlebrand licked his lips and grunted with satisfaction. I'll make haste, master, Twigleg mounted the raven. I'll be back soon. Oh, no, you won't, said Nettlebrand crossly. You'll send me news by water, understand? That's quicker than flying back and forth all the time. Water, Twigleg made a face. But it could be difficult to find water on the mountain, master. Ask the dwarf where to look, Beetlebrain, spat Nettlebrand, turning around. Treading heavily, he lumbered slowly over to examine the tapestry with its shimmering silver dragon. Thousands of threads had gone into its weaving. Nettlebrand stood very close to it. Perhaps they really are back, he murmured. After so many long years, I knew they couldn't hide from me forever. From human beings, perhaps, but not from me. Chapter 10. The Spy. Twigleg looked back uneasily at the raven, took off from the ruined castle walls, and rose into the sky. The little homunculus had only ever left the castle when Nettlebrand's hunting instincts took him down to the valleys to prey on sheep and cows. And even then they traveled by way of underground passages, for Nettlebrand was a flightless dragon, whose heavy golden armor would have made it impossible for him to rise from the ground. Instead, he swam along underground rivers deep beneath the earth, and if he came up to the surface it was only at night under cover of darkness. But now the sun, high in the sky, was bright and hot, and Twigleg had only a raven for company. Is it much farther? He asked, trying not to look down. It's the mountain over there, croaked the raven, streaking like an arrow toward it. The one with the stump-shaped peak. Do you have to fly so fast? Twigleg dug his thin fingers into the raven's feathers. This wind is almost blowing my ears off. I thought we were in a hurry, replied the raven without slowing down. You're not half as heavy as that dwarf, even though you're not much smaller. What are you made of? Air? Good guess. Twigleg was shifting uncomfortably back and forth. Air and a few other choice ingredients, but the recipe's lost. He peered ahead. There's something shining in the grass, he exclaimed suddenly. Oh, sacred salamanders! His eyes opened very wide. That stupid dwarf was right. It is a dragon. The raven circled over Friar Drake, where he lay coiled up among the rocks. A few meters away from him, Ben and Sorrel were bending over the map, with 3 mountain dwarves standing beside them. Let's land on the rocky ledge, Twigleg whispered to the raven, just above their heads where they can eavesdrop on them. When the raven landed on the ledge, Sorrel looked up suspiciously. Fly away now, Twigleg whispered to the bird. Hide in that fir tree until I give you the signal. The brownie won't notice me, but you seem to worry her. The raven rose in the air again and disappeared among the dark fir branches. Twigleg cautiously moved right out onto the ledge. Okay, I'll admit it, the brownie was saying. So we did lose our way a bit, but it doesn't really matter. We'll reach the sea tonight all the same. The only question is which sea, Sorrel, said the human. He was only a small human, still a boy. You know something, Clever Clogs, hissed the brownie girl. You can do the steering tonight. Then at least I won't have to put up with your sniping off if we go the wrong way again. Where are you going anyway? Asked one of the dwarves. Twigleg picked up his ears. We're looking for the rim of heaven, said Ben. Sorrel gave him such a hefty nudge in the ribs that he almost fell over. Who said you could tell any old chance-met dwarf that, eh? The boy became very quiet. Twigleg moved a little further forward. The rim of heaven? What on earth could that be? He's waking up, one of the dwarves announced suddenly. Look, he's waking up! Twigleg turned his head, and there he stood, the silver dragon. He was much smaller than Nettlebrand, and his eyes were not red, but golden. The dragon stretched his beautiful limbs, yawned, and then looked in surprise at the three little creatures hiding behind the human boy. Dwarves, he said in a voice with a faint rasp that sounded like the lick of a cat's tongue. Mountain dwarves. The boy laughed. Yes, they absolutely had to meet you, he said, urging the dwarves to venture out from behind him. This is Stonebeard, this is Granite Face, and this is Leaden Gleam. And this, Ben looked around in surprise. Where's the fourth of you? I don't know his name. Gravelbeard, said Stonebeard, looking up at the dragon in awe. I've no idea where he is. Gravelbeard's a bit peculiar. Up on the ledge, Twigleg could hardly keep from chuckling. Gravelbeard's an idiot, he whispered, and right now he's hard at work cleaning Nettlebrand's armor. A pebble came loose from the mannequin covered even closer to the rocky edge. The wretched stone fell right on the brownie's head. She looked up suspiciously, but Twiglet had hastily withdrawn his long nose. These dwarfs think you can pick up the scent of treasure, Firedrake, said the boy. They want you to try doing it on their mountain. Treasure? The dragon shook his head. What kind of treasure? Do you mean gold and silver? The dwarfs nodded. They looked hopefully at the dragon. Firedrake went over to the mountainside and put his nose against the rocks, drawing in the scent of them. The dwarfs crowded excitedly around his legs. It smells good, said the dragon. Different from the mountains I come from, but good. Yes, it really does. But the best in the world, I can't tell you exactly what it smells of. The dwarfs looked at one another disappointed. Are there more dragons where you come from? Asked Granite Face curiously. I'd like to know that too, whispered Twigleg up on his outlook post. Oh, yes, replied the dragon. And where I'm going as well, I hope. That's enough of that, said the brownie girl. Just when things were getting interesting, Twigleg felt like spitting on her head. She parked herself between the dwarves and the dragon and shooed the little people back. You heard what Firedrake said. He doesn't know where there any treasure in the mountains. So fetch your hammers and pickaxes and find it for yourselves. Firedrake has to rest again now. We still have a long way to go. And that was it. Over the next few hours, Sorrel ensured that Twigleg heard nothing else of interest. Instead, the dwarves told Firedrake stories of the good old days when their grandparents used to ride on dragonback, and Stonebeard gave the dragon an endless lecture on quartz and silver ore. It was infuriating. Twigleg was yawning so hard he almost fell off the ledge. When the sun was sinking low over the mountains, Twigleg left his hiding place, signaled to the raven to follow him, and laboriously clambered up the rocks to the spring that Gravelbeard had described to him. It was easy to find. The water bubbled out from a crevice in the rock and fell into a pool. The dwarves had set gleaming semi-precious stones into the rim around the natural basin. The raven settled on the spot and pecked at the beetles lurking between the rocks. But Twigleg climbed up onto the largest boulder and spat into the clear water. The smooth surface of the pool rippled. The water turned dark, and the image of Nettlebrand appeared in it. Gravelbeard was standing on the Golden One's back, dusting the spines of his crest with his large, soft brush. At last, Nettlebrand growled at Twigleg. Where have you been all this time? I almost ate this dwarf out of sheer impatience. Oh, don't do that, master, replied Twigleg. He was right. A dragon did land here. Silver and moonlight and much smaller than you, but definitely a dragon. Nettlebrand stared incredulously at the mannequin. A dragon, he whispered. A silver dragon? I've had the whole world search for them, every last grubby nook and cranny of it, and now one lands almost on my doorstep? He leered and licked his lips. See, said Gravelbeard, so excited that he dropped the brush. I found him for you. I did it. Will you give me my scale now? Maybe even 2 scales. Shut your gob, Nettlebrand snapped at him, or I'll give you a spectacular close-up view of the gold fillings in my teeth. Carry on cleaning. Gravelbeard slid off the dragon's back and in alarm retrieved the brush. Nettlebrand addressed his old armor cleaner again. Tell me what you found out about him, and are there any more of his kind where he comes from? Yes, replied Twigleg. Nettlebrand's eyes gleamed. Ah, he sighed, at last I can go hunting again. He bared his teeth. Where do I find them? Twigleg rubbed his pointed nose and looked nervously at his master's reflection. Well, he said, hunching his head between his shoulders, I don't exactly know. You don't know? Nettlebrand bellowed so loud that Gravelbeard fell head first off his back. You don't know? What have you been doing all this time, you useless spidery creature? I can't help it. It's all the brownie's fault, cried Twigleg. She makes sure the dragon doesn't say anything about where he comes from. But I know what he's looking for, master. Eagerly he bent over the dark water. He's looking for the rim of heaven. Nettlebrand straightened up and stood motionless. His red eyes were turned in Twigleg's direction, but he was looking right through him. Gravelbeard knocked the dent out of his hat and climbed back up the spiny tail, swearing. The homunculus cleared his throat. Do you know where that is, master? He asked quietly. Nettlebrand was still looking straight through him. No one knows where it is, he growled at last, except the dragons who have been there hiding for more than 100 years, ever since they escaped me. I searched for the rim of heaven until my paws were bleeding. Sometimes I was so close I thought I could smell it, but I never found the dragons, and that was the end of my great hunting days. You can hunt this dragon, though, Gravelbeard called from Nettlebeard's back. The one who was stupid enough to land in front of your nose. Huh, Nettlebrand said scornfully, slapping a paw down on the passing rat. And then what? No, the fun would be over too soon. Before I even discovered where he comes from, I'd never find out where the others are, either. Now I have a better idea. A much better idea, Twigleg. The homunculus jumped in alarm. Yes, master? You must follow him, grunted Nettlebrand. You must follow him until he leads us to the others. Either the dragons he's looking for are the dragons he's left behind. Me? Twigleg beat his thin chest pitifully. But why me, master? Aren't you coming too? Nettlebrand hissed. I'm not planning to run my paws off till they're sore again. You'll report to me every evening without fail, do you hear? And when he's found the rim of heaven, I'll join you. But how, master? Asked Twigleg. I have powers at which you cannot even guess. Go away now and get to work. And Nettlebrand's image in the pool began to blur. Wait, master, cried the mannequin. But the water in the basin grew clearer and clearer, until Twigleg was looking into the eyes of his own reflection. Oh no, he whispered. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Then, with a heavy sigh, he turned and went in search of the raven. And that was chapter 10. So we will continue next week with chapters 11 and 12. And I hope you've been enjoying our continuing reading of Dragon Rider by Cornelia Funk. Sleep well, you